Welcome to this week's edition of the Music City Mania podcast, episode number 52. 1 year's worth of podcasting that we've been bringing you here on the Nashville Cats Radio Network. Thanks to all of you who have joined us this week and who have been with us from the beginning. If you are just now joining us, I am your phenomenal host, Mr. Podcasting, Chris Belcher. I am on Twitter and Instagram at Belcher Drums. The show is at Music City Mania on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can shoot us an email, musiccitymaniapodcast@gmail.com. And you can find our show, of course, on Apple Podcast, on SoundCloud, or on Google Play. So whichever way you have found us, thanks for doing that. Again, I am Chris Belcher, your phenomenal host. With me, as always, is the professor, the North Sider baby,
the right-hand man.
The right-hand man. I always forget that one for some reason. The right-hand man, the undisputed best in the world. Jason Bakowitz is here. What is happening, my friend?
Just a fun fact for everybody out there. Chris calls me the right-hand man because I only have one hand, so that's my right hand.
Wow. Oh, my gosh. He's full of jokes today, folks. I'm glad that you didn't use the Conrad Thompson joke about being the right-hand man, that Bruce Pritchard and all that fun jazz.
Well, if I only had one hand, that would be the same type of innuendo there, right?
I guess it would be. That's true. Moving right along, we're about to dig ourselves in a really deep hole here. Moving right along, introducing...
You could always join Jerry Jarrett. I'm sure he could help you out with another hand.
Oh, my God.
Oh, you didn't know? Our podcast is better than yours.
We are 2 minutes and 13 seconds into this show, and it is off the rails. Oh, my gosh, I think that's a new record. The third member of the Triple Threat is here. You just heard him, my brother from another mother, the wild-eyed Southern boy, Jared Justice. What's the haps, my friend?
Buddy, just living the dream, another day in paradise here in Winchester, Kentucky.
Winchester, Kentucky. What's the weather looking like there this weekend? You got all that snow that they were talking about getting?
It hasn't done crap.
Yeah, it hasn't done anything here either.
So I could have went home to Pikeville. I could have came there and hung out with you and a particular girl. I could have really done anything, and instead I sat here at the house, didn't do anything because I listened to the stupid weatherman. So here I am.
Word to the wise, don't listen to the weatherman. They always wrong. So, before we get into this week's episode, one thing that I did want to mention that I failed to mention in the beginning is that if you haven't checked it out yet, our YouTube channel is up and running. You will find the audio and some exclusive video content from our show on there. So go check that out. Subscribe to that channel. Get your notifications whenever we upload some stuff. Jared and I are going to WrestleMania this year. Once again, 2 years in a row, so you can bet that there will be multiple videos and different things coming from that experience. So if you haven't subscribed up until, if you haven't subscribed when April rolls around, please make sure that you do that.
Well, we're going to be going to Metallica in January and then Kiss right after WrestleMania, so I'm sure we can have some videos from there too.
Jason, you need to join us on some of these cool adventures. Come on, man.
I agree. It's the jury's still out. There's a chance I can go, not to Mania, but to the other shows.
To Metallica.
Possibly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. Fair enough.
That'd be awesome.
That would be awesome, wouldn't it? So this week.
Love to have you, man.
This week, episode 52, 1 year's worth of podcasting we have been doing. Technically, we're not on our 1 year anniversary. That will come in January. But for 1 year's worth of podcasting, we thought that we would do something special for episode 52. We've teased it for a couple weeks now. And as you could tell by the intro music, that intro music means only one thing. And that this week we are talking about the one, the only, the chairman of the board, Vincent Kennedy McMahon. All about Vince. I don't know any wrestling podcasts. Jason, you might be able to correct me on this, and Jared as well. Are there any podcasts out there that have done just one episode all about Vince McMahon? Can you think of any?
Not to my knowledge. I mean, you guys listen to Pritchard more than I do, and I don't think he has he?
I've never heard one anywhere.
Well, what Bruce says, Bruce and Conrad always say, is they get requests to do a Vince episode, and they always say, well, every episode is a Vince episode because of the insights that they give and, you know, this, that, and the other. So, I mean, I guess that's kind of true, but at the same time, we, I guess, are the first ones that have just sat down and talked about Vince McMahon for as long as we're going to go today. So this could be interesting. If we get our facts wrong, we apologize. Again, this is a fan's perspective. This is what we experience. This is what our memories of Vince are, and we're just going to go with that. And if y'all don't like it, we got 2 words for you.
Suck it. The interesting thing here, too, is that this was actually my brainchild, but me and you, Chris, kind of traded places in life as far as having free time. And I was originally going to do the research, and then for school, you ended up having the free time to do a school paper on Mr. Vinnie Mac here.
I did.
And so I procrastinated and never did the research, and you ended up doing it. So here we are.
Here we are. That's exactly right. Yes, I did a paper for one of my classes about Vince McMahon, and I had about half the research that you're going to hear from today. So I didn't have a whole lot of work that I had to do to prepare for this show, even though that my outline says that it's 7 pages long. But, you know, we may throw the outline out the window. Who knows? I don't know.
On the, awful day that Vince McMahon finally dies, or, supposedly dies, we'll never know, because he's going to try to get himself over, right? I guarantee
he can't be on TV, man.
I guarantee that HBO will do a hell of a job doing a documentary on Vince McMahon, and I cannot wait for that day.
Not only will HBO, I'm sure, do one, but there's already rumor and innuendo that there's a biopic that's coming out about him already, and that, correct me if I'm wrong, that Bradley Cooper is going to play Vince, if I'm not mistaken.
I do remember that. I
may be the only jack-off that doesn't know what a biopic is, but what is a biopic?
The Andre the Giant show that was on HBO,
okay. That's
a biopic.
Gotcha, okay.
Biopic is a biography in movie form.
Okay, I got you. I've never heard of such before. I just heard of, biographies and then just
documentaries and stuff like that.
Yeah, whatever you call the movies that they do where they actually hire actors and do an entire movie. I guess with really no biography to go along with it, it's just like a depiction,
right, in
movie form. But anyways,
it's a biopic.
Oh my God!
Hey, pal.
Hi, pal. So we're talking about Vince dying already. Let's first jump back 73 years and let's talk about Vince was born in 1945 in North Carolina. So he grew up on the NWA. How ironic is that?
That's interesting.
It's kind of funny, isn't it?
It is.
Vince grew up with a really hard life. Some of this stuff that I researched, I didn't know about. I did not realize that his dad left his mom at a very early age, and he ended up having a series of very abusive stepfathers, a couple of which he stated publicly that he wanted to kill because he was protective of his mother. And he also had to overcome dyslexia at a young age. So just some interesting things that I didn't know about his childhood.
Wasn't there I guess rumor and innuendo, or maybe even Vince saying it or alluding to some sort of sexual abuse early in his life by someone? Maybe a stepdad or something, I don't know.
I believe that is correct.
Okay. I thought so.
I believe that is correct. So I'm sure that goes along with his anger and rage, not only of himself being abused, but his mom and, things like that. It's really interesting. He didn't actually meet his dad until he was 12 years old. And he became interested in wrestling at that point against his dad's wishes. He married Linda in 1966. Shane was born in 1970. And Stephanie was born in 1976. Just imagine what it was like for Shane and for Stephanie to grow up around all these awesome athletes and all these wrestlers that at the time, Stephanie talks all the time about Andre holding her as a kid and things like that. That's Andre the Giant. He's an icon in this business, and they're just walking around. Andre's playing cards, trying to act all tough. Stephanie walks over and jumps in his lap and, melts the guy. How cool would it be to have stories like that?
One thing that I've always found interesting, there, in every culture, subculture, sport, entertainment, there's always these certain people that kind of get glamorized as being just the best thing ever, and everybody looked up to them, and they reached legend status, and they have movies about them on HBO. But from a lot of accounts, Andre the Giant was a huge dick. Like, most people just did not like him.
And he didn't like most people.
Yeah, and if you were another big guy, you were screwed from day one.
Oh, yeah. Jason, you remember how much that biopic, it didn't really go into as much detail as I wanted, but it talked about the fact that specifically he and Big John Studd did not like each other one bit.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the reason why Andre the Giant had that bad rap is just because he was actually trying to prank people, wasn't he, Chris? It was more of a rib than really his own persona of being, an ass to other people.
Yeah, absolutely. He was that way. I think, if I remember right, to Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty when they came in, and he would just, when they came in, they were told, hey, you need to go shake the boss's hand, you need to do whatever, and Andre would ignore them. So they said that every single day they'd go in the locker room and try to shake Andre's hand, and he would totally ignore them. Finally, one day he shook their hand, and he told them that he'd been ribbing them the whole time, that he liked them.
Right.
He was just messing with them.
Right. And there's that language barrier as well. So, he could get away with that persona because nobody really knew how to communicate with him.
Me, Andre. Me, take Bumpkin. But one thing I want to add here, and this is not me trying to be funny. This is, it's going to come across funny. It's going to sound funny.
Right.
But do you think that Vince's early childhood, the things he went through, the possible sexual abuse, is what caused him to have such a strange sense of humor?
Yeah.
People kissing his rear end in public and terrible things happening to people, and he finds it hilarious, and swirlies and all that type of stuff. It tickles him to death.
It does, and it tickles him to death. He enjoys producing make-out scenes of his daughter and his wife with other people, and especially
very strange.
It is. It's really weird. So, I could say, yeah, you might be onto something there. That we all have experiences in our lives that lead to who we are today, and shape and mold our opinions and things like that. So it's very, very possible that his weird, strange childhood led to exactly what he feels today, which is really weird to think about. Vince debuted as a commentator in 1969 with his dad's company, and it's amazing to me that he commentated for almost 30 years, and he still did not learn the name of a single hold. What the heck?
Do you think that he didn't know it? Or do you think that he just, for whatever reason, again, back to him being strange, there's just certain things he doesn't like. Did he just... There was an episode, and for the life of me, I can't remember what it is. It may have been Bruce. But about how that he does not want to make certain references. Like, he doesn't want to he doesn't want the commentator just to say "I" or "we think of such and such," or "I can't believe what just happened." It's more of, "Did you see that? Oh my goodness, another hole. And he won, no, did he get him? No, he didn't get him.
He got him. He got him. No, he
Right,
didn't.
this strange way that he has, that he wants announcing to happen, and
Yeah.
I think that he was the embodiment of what he wants.
Right. I mean, nobody could produce Vince better than Vince himself. So he knew exactly what he wanted, and he went out there and executed it. But, Jason, it's hilarious that I've never heard him call a single move, ever.
You know, and I'm not 100% sure why that is, and I think Jared's theory is great. But also, I wonder if it's just that bulldog persona that he has of, I'm not going to listen to what anybody tells me to do.
Yeah.
Bulldog, I like it.
But, yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Jason. I think, it's one of those things where he can do it right. Nobody can tell him otherwise, and this is the way it has to be. And I'm the promoter, and I'm the owner, and what I say goes, and he has every right to do that. That's just the way he is. If that's the way he wants it, and you don't do it, he's going to find somebody that's going to do it. And, man, Vince being one of the voices of my childhood, I mean, nobody at that time, nobody did it better, in my opinion. That's just because that's what I remember as a child.
Well, every boss that I've ever known or that I've ever had or anything, I mean, my dad was even a boss at his job. And they all have these quirks,
Yep.
the way that they think that things should be done, things that irritate them more than others. And it's just, Vince McMahon has more than anybody I've ever heard in my life.
Right.
But it seems like every boss that has been a boss for a number of years, they develop just a way that they think should be and the way they want things done. And it might not make sense to anybody else, but to them, it's just the way they want them. And just like you said, if you're the employee and you're not going to do it, then they go and they find somebody who will. And that's to be expected. You know, that's life.
Yep. Next man up. That's for sure. So Vince purchased the company from his dad around 1982. So sometime between 1970 and 1976, after he'd already become a commentator before he purchased the company, Vince and Linda had to file for bankruptcy. And the reason that I know it's between 70 and 76 is because Shane was there, Stephanie was still in the belly of Linda. Now, Bruce Pritchard always kicks off his live shows by telling said bankruptcy story. And for the sake of this podcast, I'm going to steal it. And I'm going to tell the bankruptcy story. So, bankruptcy story goes like this, and I'll try to keep it short and sweet. So, Vince tells Bruce, I fell on hard times. I'm not talking about hard times, baby. I'm not talking about dusty roads, American dream hard times. Hard times. So, Vince and Linda lived in a trailer park, and he, they had to file for bankruptcy. They only had one vehicle at the time. So Linda drops Vince off at the bankruptcy office, and she goes with Shane, and she's going to run an errand or, what have you. And Vince says after he files for bankruptcy, he walks out of the office, and he sees his car pulling up to the sidewalk on the back of a tow truck. And in the front seat of said tow truck is Linda and little Shane. So the car breaks down. They only have one car. And they just file for bankruptcy. So they get home, and it's in the middle of the night, and they're living in a trailer, and Shane has to go pee-pee. So and guys, you both heard this story, so correct me if I'm wrong.
He's going to release the royal piss.
That's true, yes. The silver spoon. Anyway, so they're living in the trailer park, and he has to go to the bathroom, and they have to go outside because I guess back in those days, the trailers didn't have bathrooms. Is that right?
Yeah, that's what he says.
Okay. So they have to go out, And it is so cold, it's in the winter. They go out, and all the pipes are frozen and everything. And Vince has to clear a way for Shane to go pee-pee. So he takes a chisel and he takes whatever, and he's going after it. He's gotta bust it up. He's gotta make a spot for his son to go pee-pee. He's chiseling away, and there's pee and there's poop, and it's going everywhere. And it's messing up my fresh manicure. And Bruce says, "Hang on a minute." He says, "You're living in a trailer park. You just filed for bankruptcy. You only have one car, and said car is broken, yet you got a fresh manicure." And Vince McMahon, without hesitation, says, "Gotta have class, pal." So, to sum that up, many years later, when Bruce...
With the Vince McMahon obscenity before it, but yes.
With a Vince McMahon obscenity before it. But many years later, Bruce has to go file for bankruptcy as well, and he gets a mani-pedi with his wife the day that they file for bankruptcy, and he calls Vince and he tells him, and Vince tells him without hesitation, "Gotta have class, pal." So Vince McMahon, in all of his quirkiness and weirdness, goes and gets manicures when he has to file for bankruptcy.
Mr. Podcasting, I'm going to have to correct you just a tad bit there.
Go for it. I told you could.
The way that I think it went was that, he calls Vince McMahon to tell him that, he's filed for bankruptcy. And Vince McMahon, "Oh, that's great, pal. I'm glad to hear it." And then somehow it comes into the whole gotta have class.
Right.
Whenever it comes up about Bruce getting his mani-pedi.
Yes. Vince does congratulate him on filing for bankruptcy. That is correct.
Yeah, exactly.
That is correct. So, we go from filing bankruptcy sometime between 1970 and 1976 to buying the company in 1982. And then 3 short years later, we get WrestleMania. The first one, Madison Square Garden, 1985. Vince has always been a visionary, and this absolutely proves it. He's been quoted in a lot of interviews saying that all the other wrestling companies, including his father's, were literally being stupid and were afraid to try to appeal to a much bigger audience, and that they weren't willing to work as hard as Vince. Sounds just like him, right? That's Vince
Absolutely.
For you.
Yes.
That's Vince for you. So this is extremely risky, of course, and why the reason I think it's risky is for putting the title on Hulk Hogan, and you guys defend this. Hogan was gaining momentum at the time. He was becoming popular, but he just won his first championship the year before from the Iron Sheik, who's a legend in the business. At this point, Hogan, I guess you could call him a journeyman, because he came from the AWA. He was in Japan. He wasn't really well known. He was still this big jacked up guy. But I still think it was a risk to put the title on Hogan. And basically, you're putting a company that you just bought 3 years ago behind a relatively unknown guy. While you have Roddy Piper and Jimmy Snuka and guys like that who are already established in your company, yet you're going with a different guy. What do you guys think?
I mean, I'm not going to defend it, but I think I can tell you maybe the rationale.
Go for it.
Is that Hulk Hogan is the embodiment of everything that Vince wants. He's not a great wrestler. He's an entertainer. He's jacked up by doing whatever it was that he was doing, and most people were doing back in those days.
True.
And he has great charisma. And I think that, Piper was a pretty stocky guy at one point, but I mean, he really didn't look like a comic book hero. Snuka had a little bit of maybe a language barrier or just something where he didn't really come off that good in interviews. There was some charisma, but I mean, he never really made me want to jump up and shout up and down and root for him whenever I've watched him. But here's Hogan, and for whatever reason, that charisma and looking like the Incredible Hulk, the comic book character, except he's not green. people wanted to cheer for this guy. So, kind of makes sense.
Oh my goodness! Can you imagine? Before you add Jason, can you imagine if Vince would have decided to paint Hulk Hogan green? I mean, it sounds like something he would do. I think.
I can see it.
I'm surprised he didn't wear green out to the ring.
Yeah, exactly. Go ahead, Jason. I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
No, I was just gonna say that I think Jared's theory there is pretty spot on. I think having caught up and raised in Attitude Era, Vince has his guys. It doesn't matter who's established at that time. Going back to the commentator segment we talked about with Vince not knowing or not naming a hold or not knowing holds, Vince is going to be stubborn and push who he thinks is going to be the right fit for the company. So I think Jared was pretty spot on that there must have been some connection Vince saw early on with Hulk Hogan.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's interesting, and we see that nowadays. There are a lot of guys that Vince will push to the top, and sometimes we're not sure why, and he always seems to figure out what's right.
And going to your question, Chris, I mean, the risk, we all see it, whenever he pushes like a Roman Reigns or a John Cena, but to Vince, his idea of risk might be something totally different, and that might be the smart move to him and his brain that he has of creating this company. So he may not have seen Hulk as a risk like we might have.
Right, and I'm sure he didn't because like you both said, Hogan's a big jacked up guy. He's got charisma, that kind of thing. So that makes sense. That makes sense as Vince wouldn't see it as a risk because he doesn't see anything as a risk. He just sees it as working hard. He sees a different vision than the rest of us do. We all know coming out of this that WrestleMania was a huge success. I mean, not only was it a financial success, it was shown on closed circuit, which means that tickets were sold to local arenas and theaters for people to be able to watch the event. Vince would then just start knocking off other promotions, making deals with the cable company that they couldn't show other promotions if they wanted WrestleMania. He would make the deals with wrestlers, paying them to exclusively work for him, something that nobody had ever done. But Mania would not have been as big a success, I don't think, without the help of the celebrities that were there. I mean, that's just huge mainstream attention from guys like Muhammad Ali, Cyndi Lauper, and, of course, Mr. T. I know that Jason and I weren't alive at this point. Jared was barely alive at this point. So firsthand, we don't have that firsthand knowledge of exactly what this was for mainstream culture and for the wrestling business. But Jason, start with you. Talk about the impact that it must have been for those celebrities at WrestleMania. Nowadays we get coverage on ESPN, things like that. I know we live in a different age now, but that makes this impact of these celebrities in 1985, that makes it that much bigger. Wouldn't you agree?
100%. I think when you look at this WrestleMania in the lens that, we were 20 or 30 years old growing up with it, I kind of think that the television deals and the crossover had the main effect on this being a huge success because of exposure. These celebrities were probably seen either in movies, heard on the radio, but you never really had something where you could see them constantly, like television. And so I think with the addition of television, it really started to put WWE on the map, and it gave them that mainstream exposure that they needed.
Absolutely. Yeah, they're not just the territory up north anymore. Vince started globally expanding. Jared, what do you think about those celebrities and their involvement?
I think if you look back, man, and my papa that I never met, from everything I can gather, raised there in eastern Kentucky, probably what most people would call a hillbilly or a redneck, just like myself. And I think that was a lot of what your wrestling culture and your wrestling audience was back in the day. My other pawpaw that I did meet was a World War II Marine. Wasn't as really, I guess, redneck and maybe I'd still say hillbilly, maybe not as redneck as what I've heard about the other one in a way. And I'm not saying that in a derogatory sense because, like I said, it's what I grew up with. But I think that was what a lot of people who watched wrestling, whether they were or not, were classified as rednecks and hillbillies. And it was much grittier if you watch the NWA. I almost think and wish that it should go back a little bit to that, a little bit more, looking a little bit more manly, a little bit more real fight atmosphere. But I think with the inclusion of these celebrities, that's what Vince accomplished that no other wrestling promotion did. Is it made it more entertainment, more mainstream. It kind of put the silver lining or the golden lining or platinum lining on it that no other company had.
Right. Yeah, you're 100% right about that. That's for sure. He was willing to take that chance that nobody else was to get that global exposure, to make deals that were going to hurt people's feelings, but as long as it benefited him and his company, he didn't really care. Let's move on to the early 90s. Jared, before we do, anything about Vince that you want to add from that point, the first WrestleMania up until the steroid trial that we're about to address? Anything else you want to add specific about Vince and any memories of during that time? I know a WrestleMania 3 introduction comes to mind for me.
It's WrestleMania. No, I think we pretty well covered it, man.
The Queen of Soul, Miss Aretha Franklin.
Yeah, I think we pretty well covered it. I think that we're doing a good job so far. I mean, I've learned some stuff, so I'm sure people out there have too.
Well, if you haven't learned anything, then, just shut us off. Just be done. For the rest of you that are still here,
don't shut us off. This is the best podcast out there.
Oh, my goodness. For the fans, by the fans. That's what we do here. So as we turn into the 90s, as you talked about earlier, as you both hinted at earlier, Hulk Hogan was on some stuff. Vince was on some stuff. Mostly everybody was on some stuff. And in 1993, it caught up with Vince. He was taken to trial on these counts of steroids and distributing and things like that. He was acquitted of all the charges, which is really interesting, because of what we've already talked about. These guys, you could tell that they were on something, It was blatantly obvious. So it's amazing to me that he was acquitted of all these charges. I know you guys don't have a lot of research in front of you, but in your best guess, why do you think that he got off?
The thing is that we have to remember, and I don't know the year in particular, but steroids were legal. Steroids in mass use can do quite a number on your cardiovascular system. There's actually a particular patient I'm thinking of that I heard about. I had no contact with this patient. Don't know his name. Know a little bit about him, but I'm not going to say anything. But that supposedly was doing steroids and basically had a huge dissection, which means that your aorta, part of your heart that pumps blood throughout your whole body, dissected. It split in two. There was such a stress put on his heart and on his cardiovascular circulatory system that literally his aorta split in two and it killed him. And back then there wasn't any of this research really that showed any negatives to steroids, and I'm not sure at what point they became illegal in this country. You still have pro hormones. A lot of those are now banned. I'm not going to say whether I have or haven't used them, but at one point those were legal. Right. And there wasn't much research as to any negative side effects they can have. And they still put them out that have certain compounds that are different than the old ones that are illegal now, and they'll stay legal for a few years, and then the FDA will ban them, and then they'll come out with new ones, and those will be legal. So the thing that I think a lot of people forget about is that steroids were illegal. So if Vince was strongly suggesting, whether he said it or not, that he liked people who were on steroids, at that time it would be like him saying, I like people who eat apples. Completely legal. You know,
Right.
people didn't have to eat apples, but they might think, well, Vince likes it if I eat an apple, so I'm going to eat an apple. Nothing wrong with it. I'm going to go ahead and eat it.
Yeah, there you go. Jason, what's your take on him?
I would. I was kind of thinking the same thing. I don't know when they became illegal per se, kind of like Jared was speculating. And I wondered, not to get political, but I wonder if the trial was brought up because the states may regulate the steroid use individually. So I don't know, going without all this research, certain states nowadays don't allow blood on TV, or, don't allow certain moves that the WWE can do while others do. So I don't know if that was kind of what was going on at this time. Like a New York, state of New York was suing Vince for steroid use when in the country, a lot of states still had it legal. So it was kind of a gray area, so to say.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There's definitely a gray area in the whole thing. And it's one of those things where I guess, if you can't 100% prove it, then you may as well be acquitted. And maybe that was the case. Like I said, without having a whole lot of research, there's not a whole lot to speak about that. We could do a whole other podcast on the steroid trial, and get all political and, do all that fancy stuff. But the main thing from the steroid trial, yes, Vince got acquitted. Jared, that was a time when a certain individual by the name of Jerry Jarrett says that he was commissioned to run the company if Vince went to jail. Yeah.
Well, I mean, if he had, I would say there'd have been a lot more circles formed in the backstage area. Is about all I can say for that.
Oh my gosh. And Jeff Jarrett would have been the new 16-time world champion.
Exactly.
For sure. But the big thing from the steroid trial is that it signaled the fact that the WWE was moving on from Hulk Hogan. Now, he had already left the company because he testified against Vince during the trial. So he had already left the company, but Vince was forced to have alternate choices for his world champions. We saw guys like Randy Savage. We saw guys like Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels. You still had your bigger guys that were champions like Diesel and like Yokozuna and things like that. But the smaller guys were getting a bigger push. This is just my opinion. But I think if Vince hadn't gone through the steroid trial, we all know how stubborn he is. He may not have ever gone away from the philosophy of big guys dominating the territory. Just think, if Brett and Shawn never become champions, we don't see Daniel Bryan, we don't see AJ Styles, we don't see Seth Rollins. I think you can even lump Steve Austin into that category because he's not a big guy. Jason, let's start with you. What's your opinion on if Vince changed his mind because of the trial about pushing bigger guys?
I'm not 100% sure if that holds any water. I when you name all these smaller talent, I think it's because of how good they were, either in the ring with their promos or just the value that Vince saw in these guys. Because someone like a Dolph Ziggler nowadays, right? He kind of had a shot, but he's pretty much treading water. So he is not your Shawn Michaels or AJ Styles, and never will be. So I kind of put it on the wrestlers themselves, and Vince saw and respected them and pushed them.
My only pushback for that is that we saw all these great wrestlers in the 80s and the 90s that were never world champions. You still had your Bret Harts. You had your Ricky Steamboats. You had your guys like that who were dominating the mid-card, who were having phenomenal matches, but none of them were really pushed, I don't feel like, until after the steroid trial. That's just me. Jared, what do you think on that?
I personally think Vince still likes people who are big and jacked up and look like they're on steroids.
Oh,
but they really are.
Yeah, he certainly likes them still, but go ahead. Go ahead.
I think you had a lot of people backstage, Gerald Briscoe and Pat Patterson, who were big fans of Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels, and they saw them coming out of their tag teams, Bret with Jim the Anvil and Shawn with Marty Jannetty. They saw them coming out as being more than the whole of being with another person.
Right.
And so I think that combined with the whole steroid mess is what led to Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels in particular. I think that the other ones, man, Stone Cold, Daniel Bryan, CM Punk, I think the argument can be made for all of those that Vince, he didn't want those guys to make it.
Yeah.
The fans made them make it.
Yep.
Vince was just dragged kicking and screaming. Now, Stone Cold's a little bit different just because he's a little bit more broader. He at least does legitimately seem to hit the 6 foot mark.
Yep.
And he's not like a high flyer. He's a brawler and, a technician at one point. But I think that Vince's mind has never changed. It's just been the fans have kind of made him put certain people over, or else I think we'd still be seeing. Point in case, if Roman Reigns wasn't battling leukemia, he would still be the number one guy, and nobody wanted him to be the number one guy except for Vince.
Right.
So there you go. And he looks like he's on steroids. Whether he is or not, I don't know. There's different things you can go about HGH and some other things that aren't as easily able to test for.
And
so
he was caught with something not too long ago, right?
He got banned. He was doing something he wasn't supposed to be doing.
Well, and Jared, I know this is kind of a tangent, but this is what we do. But Jared, you work in the medical fields, and cancer, if he did have that type of struggle growing up, I don't know how many, 10 or 15 years ago, that, depreciates your body. So I can totally see why Roman Reigns took, whatever legal substances he could, like HGH or illegal, just to get his body up, because that chemo and radiation really takes a toll on your physique, so to speak.
Well, I mean, the thing is, and I'm not going to identify exactly how I feel politically because it's really a combination of a lot of different things. But if we're a free country, I honestly think that people should be able to take whatever that they can to reach their goals or whatever. I mean, in Mexico, you can go down there and order steroids at the pharmacy. If you want to take the risks, you can do it. It's up to you. And the thing about steroids, with shooting your testosterone up, whether it's, a legal way of just exercising more, particularly your legs, and then your body produces more testosterone, or whether it's synthetically, you inject it or take an oral form, it helps your body to recuperate from any kind of injury that you have much faster, which is why I wonder about John Cena and how fast that he's come back from various injuries before. But, I can't say I blame him if he tried to, take whatever steps that he could do to help put his body over the edge and get the most out of himself that he could.
Right. Well, I mean, because some of those times that he was hurt was during the Super Cena era, and, the time that he came back to the Royal Rumble in like 4 months when he was supposed to be out for like 8 to 12 or whatever, that was the time when he was getting super pushed. So, yeah, I can't say that I blame him because he's right in the middle of the biggest push that he's ever going to get. And you see guys that, Shawn Michaels was pushed in the late 90s, but a back injury stopped that. And, I can see Cena easily saying, well, I'm not going to let an injury stop me. I'm going to get back as fast as I can and, do what I can to get back. So I certainly agree.
There's certain freaks of nature, and I don't say that in a derogatory sense because I honestly wish I was one of them. That their body just produces more testosterone. These people usually have balding problems. A lot of times they will put on fat easier if they don't exercise. I used to work with a guy, and he was very explicit in how honest he was about everything in general. And he swears that he never took a steroid. This guy was jacked. I watched him go in there, put so many 45s on the barbell, the long bar, and about 450 pounds that he bounced off his chest with these. So there are these people that look like they take steroids that don't, but they're one out of 50,000, 100,000, something like that. And so, I mean, I'm not accusing Cena of taking anything, but man, it sure looks like he does, and it sure seems like he does. So I don't know.
Yeah, there's definite arguments to be made on either side of that about Cena. And again, that steroid trial and that whole thing is a podcast of itself. Jason, anything else you need to add about any of that?
No, I thought we capped that off pretty nicely.
Okay. Moving on from the early 90s to the late 90s, and something we all remember fondly as the Attitude Era. In 96, 97, WCW was kicking WWF's tail in the ratings. Vince had to pull something out of his rear end. Just imagine what the product would look like today, just for a minute, if WCW had not been able to compete. Let's say that they hired, I don't know, Tony Schiavone to run the company in late 1993 rather than Eric Bischoff. Schiavone was up for the job, and he didn't get it in favor of Bischoff. I mean, we would have kept guys like Diesel. We'd have kept guys like Razor and 1-2-3 Kid, things like that. But just imagine, if WCW doesn't have Bischoff and they go under, I would argue we would still have plumbers, garbage men, and dentists in the WWE.
I disagree.
Okay.
I think that if you look back, whenever that Raw was at its grittiest, what did Eric Bischoff do? He produced a clean, up-to-date, modern, entertainment-looking product that was WCW Nitro.
Mm-hmm.
So he kind of did what Vince is doing today. And I think that Tony Schiavone was back from when you just had athletes, man. You had your Stings that had face paint. You had, your Road Warriors that had face paint. You had Lex Luger. But these were just jacked-looking guys that you would think of seeing in a bar scene that you don't want to go up and mess with. There was like, Norman the Lunatic and things like that. But I think that Vince is really the one that pioneered all this garbage about, he's an electrician. We'll bring him in as an electrician, and that's what he's going to be billed as. Or a garbage man. Ha-ha! I don't think Tony was as big into it. I think he would have kept it more NWA, late NWA, early WCW looking, which is really what I crave and what I would really like to have today.
Well, let's rephrase it then. Jason, let me ask you. If WCW hadn't rose to the prominence that it did, if it hadn't gotten as big as it did, let's say Tony Schiavone was given the helm and he didn't do well. Do you think Vince's product, if WCW doesn't compete, does Vince's product change? Obviously, he's a visionary, so he's going to change a little bit with the times. But I just see it being you're having the same sort of storylines. I don't think it would change. What do you think?
I think it would have changed. Probably not as drastically. If you took WCW out of the equation, I think that Vince would have noticed, tanking ratings, so to speak, because on, something like MTV, at the time, I think in the 90s, the whole world went through an attitude change, or at least pop culture in America had.
That's a good point.
And so I think Vince would have adapted in his own way, but maybe not as drastically to compete against WCW.
That's a great point. You had it, like you said, pop culture. You had Nirvana coming on the music scene. You had grunge. You had rock. You had the Soundgardens and the Foo Fighters and the Red Hot Chili Peppers and things like that. So the music scene changed.
And sex on TV, was probably a big thing too. So that's kind of how Vince got around it, because other shows were putting sex on TV. So
absolutely.
Jerry Springer, for example.
Right.
Jerry Springer, 100%. So to credit Bruce Pritchard, he often says that Shawn Michaels is the guy that kicked off the Attitude Era. The things that he was doing in '97, stuffing the flag up his nose, stuffing gauze in his shorts, doing all those shenanigans. Bruce has always said that Vince would come into meetings after getting into it with Shawn. He'd be so firing mad at Shawn. I can't believe he did that. And just upset with Shawn, but then turning right around in the same breath and saying that Shawn's doing exactly what we need. He's got more edge. He's got more attitude. We need more edge. We need more attitude. Jared, I know we've had this discussion on this show before, but let's kind of recap, and then Jason, we'll hear from you. Is there a single event that comes to mind for you that really kicked off the Attitude Era, or like a series of events?
I think DX forming. I think Brett Screws Brett. I think Stone Cold at the King of the Ring. Austin 316. I think all that combined is really what did it. Even you could even say Mankind flying off the top of that sail, and then flying through the sail.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's really what put the rocket on it and shot it off into the stratosphere.
Yeah. I would say all you hit the nail on the head. All those Austin at King of the Ring kind of set everything up, and then after that you had him going into Brian Pillman's house and them having a war like nobody had ever seen on TV. I think the Bret Hart promo, the Raw before WrestleMania 13, where he's in the cage and he uses some expletives that we had never heard on TV before, I think that is a catalyst. And then, of course, Montreal, which we're going to get to. I think it's where the Attitude Era really caught fire and really took off. Jason, what do you think?
Well, I have a question. Okay, so when Diesel and Razor Ramon left the WWF,
yes,
and went to WCW and started that invasion angle, was that way before the quote-unquote Attitude Era in WWE?
So Diesel and Razor went in May of '96. June of '96 is when Austin won the King of the Ring and dropped the Austin 316 promo.
Okay,
so
because that was always my definition of what kickstarted the Attitude Era in all of wrestling. But I, obviously, if you had to pinpoint something in the WWF that made the catalyst, I would definitely say that Austin promo is probably the most regarded, or one of the very first regarded instances of the Attitude Era.
That's a good point.
Two other things too. The first ever Hell in a Cell match was Shawn and Undertaker, and also I can't remember who was the other person in the cage. Chris, I'm sure you do. But it was Diesel in the old blue cage. I'm thinking against Bret
Hart, where the Undertaker comes up from the ring.
Yep, there was just something about that, man, that really seemed different. It seemed gritty. It seemed like it was helping to usher in the Attitude Era. I can't even explain what it is, but something that night seemed different.
Well, I was there in live and in living color seeing that match in person in Louisville, Kentucky at In Your House, February of '96, and it was pretty freaking awesome. Just going to say. Regardless, we could sit here and debate all day long with good reason as to what started the Attitude Era, but what made the Attitude Era is when Vince came on TV and he became Mr. McMahon. I mean, you could have all these events, you could have an edgier product, but Vince McMahon took it over the edge. And it all started with that famous promo on Raw where, you know, we don't want to insult your intelligence with good guys and bad guys and phony characters, blah, 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 blah. All that stemming from the Montreal Screwjob and, you know, Vince being afraid that Brett was going to take the title to WCW, so he screwed him. Brett pitched a fit, just like Brett does. Vince did Jared's favorite promo, like you mentioned earlier, the Brett screwed Brett interview. I know that he had to get out in front of all of this because he didn't know when Brett was going to show up, but was Brett screwed Brett the right way to handle it? Was it the right phrase to use? Jared, would you have done it if you were in Vince's shoes? How would you have handled Brett going to WCW and thinking he was going to take the title?
I mean, I don't think you can argue that he made the best absolute choice anybody could make. Looking back, how would I have handled it? I mean, I think there was a compromise that could have been made looking back. But you had these two huge egos that was Bret Hart, that was Shawn Michaels, and that was Vince McMahon, and nobody was going to give.
No.
I think if somebody had gave, and I think that just the way that I normally handle things, I would have been the person that would have been like, okay, this is ridiculous. Let's sit down here. Let's all give a little. Let's come up with a solution. And I think that something else could have been done. That's the way I would have handled it. But now, would the way I have handled it drawn the business that Vince ended up drawing by becoming Mr. McMahon? This prick that thinks that he's the babyface, but he's not. I don't think it could have been handled any better, man. I think that he made the right call. I mean, looking back, how can you argue?
Oh yeah, you can't argue it for sure, but playing Monday morning quarterback is always fun to debate. I think, Jared, you made an interesting point about getting the three of them in a room together and just hashing it out. Jason, do you think that was even a possibility in '97? Do you think there was a time the three of them got in a room together? Or how would you have went about handling it if you would have been Vince?
I don't see why they couldn't all meet. You know, I understand that egos get in the way, but I mean, if your boss calls you into the office, you're going to go because it's still your boss at the end of the day. Right. So I don't see why it never happened, or, you know, I don't know what the rumors are about that. But, yeah, I kind of say, you know, playing quarterback, I think Vince made the right choice. I don't think he envisioned his character, his evil character taking off like it did because of the Brett screwed Brett phrase. But I think that the Brett screwed Brett phrase is exactly what Vince felt in the time. It's kind of going back to what Jared was saying earlier about bosses sometimes. The next guy up, you know, way of thinking about your company. I think that's kind of the way Vince saw it. He said, okay, well, he had every opportunity to stay with us and he chose not to. So he you know, we're the right company. We're the best company. And, you know, he did that to himself. So that's kind of where I see it.
For sure. Yep. That makes a lot of sense. So the Attitude Era kicks off with Brett screwed Brett. We get that promo. We get Brett going to WCW. We get just all of that that you didn't expect. All of that one could argue was planned or whatever. Again, that's a whole nother podcast. But in any event, you get the Attitude Era kicking off with Vince really coming on screen and becoming a character, but then he gets in a rivalry. You know, we talked about bosses a whole lot on this show, and you've got to have that one guy that goes against the evil boss. Somebody's got to lead the charge, and somebody's got to fight back, and that guy was Stone Cold Steve Austin. The most famous rivalry will go down in history. It's probably the best rivalry in the history of wrestling. I don't know what argument you can make that would be better than Austin versus McMahon. Jason, I know that around this time, our parents, we weren't really allowed to watch the WWF product during this time. But catching yourself up over the years, what are some of your favorite Austin McMahon memories? What stands out that makes this rivalry so great?
Well, you're right. My parents would not let me watch WWE, but that would draw me to sneak it as much as I could when they weren't in the other room, or and I'd quickly turn the channel back when they'd come by or whatnot, or when they'd go to bed, I would sneak it and turn it on. That said, the best thing I ever saw live was the beer bath. That Austin gave. And another thing that I loved was just whenever Stone Cold would damage one of Vince McMahon's vehicles, whether it was with the concrete or, running something over with a monster truck. As a kid, that was the coolest thing because you never saw that on TV.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, especially not on a wrestling show. You think of wrestling, you think you're going to watch wrestling. You're not going to watch a guy's Corvette getting filled with cement and things like that. So, yeah, you're right. And to your parents and to mine, I pulled those tricks too. Sorry about that. If you're listening, we're almost 30. Forgive us. It's okay. Jared, what about you? I know that you are one of the bigger Stone Cold fans, I guess, that I've ever met. So that was really your heyday. What are some of your favorite memories of that rivalry between him and Vince?
Man, I loved it whenever that you had the Undertaker and the Ministry going against the corporation, and whenever they hoisted those Stephanie and Stone Cold up on the thing they didn't want to say was a cross, but it was a cross,
right?
The emblem, it's the emblem. Ha ha. That was some of my favorite stuff. I hated the way it ended up with Vince being the ultimate power or the whatever, but
right.
I loved that time period, man. I loved it all.
It was definitely some good stuff. All the beer bashes, all of Jason, like you said, the vehicle destruction, and you've got Austin. Also, when Vince went to the hospital, you have the whole bedpan and him coming out and Vince peeing himself and the gun that Austin had and all that. It was, it's good stuff. It's you don't see that today. Those events were like, of course you see Braun Strowman flipping things over and things like that, but not like it was in 97, 98, 99. That's for sure. So from the Attitude Era, we move on to acquiring the competition. March of 2001, the WCW was purchased by Vincent Kennedy McMahon. ECW purchased a few short weeks after that. This is the end of an era. The golden years of wrestling officially over with. Jared, talk about your memories. I know Jason and I just hinted at the fact that we flipped back and forth when we weren't supposed to. Talk about your memories of just being able to flip back and forth on Monday and see what segments you could see and and then being able to catch ECW whenever you could, and just the days of having all three promotions running wild.
I too flipped back and forth when I wasn't supposed to. I was not supposed to be watching WWF. I think I actually got grounded from it before you ever did.
Really? I don't remember that.
Yeah, whenever that Raw was coming to Rupp Arena, and I was supposed to go to a signing with Mankind and two other, maybe Owen Hart and somebody else, maybe Triple H, and for whatever reason, they canceled the signing. And so I had won those tickets on like the radio. Okay. So they said that they were going to give us tickets to Raw at Rupp Arena. And Mom and Dad would not let me go. So I still hold that against them to this day. However, moving right along. Just looking back at it, I remember going on vacation to a beach. I'm wanting to say either Myrtle Beach or Virginia Beach, and I couldn't go to sleep, and so I stayed up and I found ECW for the first time ever. I didn't get it at home, but I found it. I knew what it was. I found it on, like what Eric Bischoff and Bruce always say, 100 and some level channel, randomly, on at like 2 a.m. in the morning. I think church was the next morning. And so I couldn't go to sleep, so I watched ECW and absolutely loved it. It was like Hardcore TV or something, I think was the name of the show. But I remember looking back, man, everybody was so excited and so pumped that just to see what was going to happen now that WWF had acquired WCW and ACW. And really, man, that was kind of the downfall of the wrestling boom looking back. I mean, nobody really should have been excited. We all should have been crying tears just because that wrestling has never got back to that level again. I mean, there's no competition. And without competition, Vince kind of sits on his thumb and just produces the crap that we see every Monday and a lot of Tuesdays.
Right. Well, Jared, let's piggyback right on that. You talked about how there was no competition. Well, WWE, pronouns pal, tried to create their own competition when they acquired WCW, and they wanted to keep WCW alive. They wanted to have a separate brand and have WCW guys on one show and WWF on the other show. Of course, you didn't have the major players, so the show's not going to be as good, but let's say they would have gotten half of those major player guys. We know that it failed immediately, but if you get those guys, do you think they would have had any success keeping WCW alive as a separate brand at all, or how long do you think it would have taken before it would have flopped? Let's say if you get some of those guys.
I think that wrestling would never have dipped as low as what it is now if that whole thing had turned out differently. I think probably 3 years max, you could have kept it going and had WCW and WWF fighting, but eventually Vince's ego would have taken over and he would have wanted to push WWF and put WWF all over everything, and then it would have come to an end regardless.
Yep, that's definitely sounds like Vince. Definitely sounds like something that he would do. Eventually, he'd just get tired of it. Jason, what do you think?
I think if they had those players that they weren't able to acquire, like the big stars in WCW that you mentioned, I think they would have probably had a better run. Obviously, that's easy to see, but I think it would have evolved into what SmackDown is or was during that time later on when they did the draft. I think that would have just started that whole brand split a little earlier. Yeah. That's what I would think, and I think it's proven that it does okay. It's not always competing with Raw. Raw is always the flagship show, but it could have made it a little bit more competitive between the two.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that they could have. The creative was there. The idea was correct. They just didn't have the players in place to make it successful. Now, regardless of the brand split didn't work out. But when you look at it from a talent perspective, the truly talented guys rose to the top. The guy that I think benefited the most truly became a star, even though he looked like a fool his first night in when The Rock called him out. And that guy was Booker T. So if you take the guys who had already been over when WCW had closed, so you don't count Jericho, don't count Guerrero, Benoit, Ric Flair had already been there. Take all those guys out. Jared, wouldn't you have to say that, or if you have somebody else, argue that, but wouldn't you say Booker T has to be the most successful guy coming in during that time and having the best overall run?
Yeah. I mean, I can't think of anybody else. So, I mean, I can't argue that point.
There you go. Jason, anybody else, not necessarily that got to the level of success that Booker got, but that had a memorable run, a lengthy run at all?
Nothing comes to my mind other than the guys that you said we needed to take away. So yeah, Booker I would say is the best example of that.
We can't move away from WCW without mentioning one more time Eric Bischoff. Eric Bischoff was brought in as the general manager in 2002. Nobody saw that move coming. Nobody. Because that's the guy who wanted to put Vince McMahon under. But Vince brings him in just to bury him one more time. How funny. I mean, it's cool that he brought Bischoff in, but he had to bring him in. I mean, I know his long-term plan wasn't to put him in a garbage truck on his way out, but it's fitting the way it ended, don't you think?
Very much so. I mean, it was shocking in the time, and that Vince continued that. I don't know, just that hatred towards the general manager. The way that they booked Bischoff and kind of put Austin against him. It was kind of like the Austin McMahon light version, so to speak, if I remember correctly. And yeah, I mean, I think Bischoff knew at the time, just because he goes out in a garbage truck doesn't mean he's getting buried, so to speak. But he knew what he was taking at the time and knew that Vince would rib him and whatnot. And I think they both had a mutual agreement of what this character would be and the relationship between him and Vince would be.
You're exactly right. Yeah, you're exactly right on that. Jared, anything else you want to add about Eric Bischoff and his couple of years run there in WWE?
Just thinking back, if you wanted to throw ECW into the question that you asked before this one about who made it big,
sure.
I think RVD is right up there with Booker T, maybe even on another level than Booker T. And yeah, I think something inside of Vince just wanted to kind of kick Bischoff kind of in the nuts one more time. But again, if you look back from what Bischoff says, it's very true. I mean, Vince McMahon pissed himself on national TV. He was covered in poo. He was covered in fake blood. He was beer bathed. Everything demeaning you can think of happened to Vince McMahon, even worse than what he did to Eric Bischoff. So I don't know that you could say that he necessarily buried Bischoff, but I think if Vince is honest with himself, that kind of one last kick to Bischoff kind of did make him get his jollies off.
Right. So. Exactly. And that's kind of what I meant. Maybe buried was the wrong word to use. But yeah, that's what I meant by that comparison. As we move on through the years to Vince McMahon, we go to around 2004, 2005-ish. I know that you guys are extremely fond of Vince and his rivalry and his wars with Stone Cold Steve Austin, but my favorite era of the Vince McMahon character was during 2005, 2006 when he feuded with Shawn Michaels and Triple H, did Generation X. I mean, you can't say there's much on wrestling that's funnier than seeing Vince, Shane, and the Spirit Squad get crap dumped all over them, having Shawn and Triple H dress up like Shane and Vince. I mean, just, coming in the production truck, spray painting the plane, doing all this. That stuff was hilarious to me. That's some of my favorite stuff. Jason, what do you think?
I'll be honest. I mean, I wasn't watching as closely at this time. I mean, I remember being excited that DX reunited, but I think at the time I was kind of hoping it was the old DX. And so I might not have been as interested just because it was kind of the dawning of that PG era. And I mean, it wasn't necessarily the start of the PG era, but it was heading in that direction. And so, yeah, there were times it was hysterical. Like, you would never have gotten the Shawn Michaels super kick backstage promo thing. He kept super kicking everybody, and when they came out, Triple H and Shawn came out as Vince and Shane. I mean, that was one of the best imitations of those two I've ever seen in my life. And they look like them. They really nailed some things. So I'm fortunate to be able to get the network $9.99, brother, and go back and watch some of that stuff that I missed because I wasn't as interested because I was kind of craving that Attitude Era at that time.
Jared, I know this was during your college years, so maybe you didn't watch a whole lot. But what was your opinion on this DX Vince rivalry during this time? I think Jason hit the nail on the head that this really was, if you think about it, was the start of the PG era. What was your opinion on this, Jared?
I thought it was really funny. They would draw chickens everywhere that stood for the word cock and then make random jokes about it. I mean, it was entertaining, I'll admit, but there was nobody that legitimately looked like they could pose a threat against DX. And that was what really made it lack to me because there really wasn't a battle. It was just kind of DX saying, we're going to make you look stupid. And there's nobody that's going to stop us. And if I'm going to watch something and be thoroughly entertained and remember it, I need somebody on the opposing side that could stop them. And there just was nobody. So I don't really look back at it with rose-colored glasses necessarily.
Yeah, that's very true. The only people that you had the cell match with the McMahons and the Big Show against DX, and that was kind of the final straw. That was the McMahons recruiting the Big Show. They tried to throw the Spirit Squad at them, and we all know how laughable that was. Just ask Dolph Ziggler. So you're right. There wasn't really any threat to DX. So I mean that makes a lot of sense. I guess I'm partial to Shawn Michaels and Triple H, and I enjoy all that kind of stuff. But in this era of Vince, kind of 2005 on, we can't talk about Vince without talking about the only United States president to be in the WWE Hall of Fame, the only president that's received a Stone Cold Stunner, and that is our current one, Donald Trump. We're not going to get political on the show. Don't worry. Don't shut us off. But no matter of your opinion of Donald Trump, no matter if you have one or not, everybody does, it seems, he played a huge role in the company in 2006, bringing huge mainstream attention to WrestleMania that year. And, of course, the famous hair versus hair match with Lashley and Umaga with Austin as a referee and Vince and Trump being involved. Vince getting his head shaved, coming out in those dorky-looking hats and, things like that. Jason, what do you think it would have taken for Trump to have gotten his head shaved? What would Vince have had to pay him?
I think he would have had to have been the majority owner of the WWE at the time. I think I don't know. I don't know Trump as well, but I feel like his hair is kind of his trademark. So he would have to get something in return that would be of substantial proportions. But saying that, I enjoyed this feud. I think there was one time that Trump dropped money from the rafters.
He did. Yep.
And seeing Trump jump onto Vince McMahon and pummel him with some punches and things like that. It's just you just don't see that nowadays. It's like a billionaire versus billionaire. It's just it was fun, and I think they hit it off well.
It was the battle of the billionaires for sure. Jared, what did you think about Trump before he was the president, getting dropped with a stunner, and what do you think it would have taken for him to get his head shaved in the WWE, if anything?
Honestly, from everything that I've heard about Trump and how that he was so willing to take a stunner, I think if Vince just asked him, "Hey, you want to get your head shaved? I really need this favor from you," I think Trump would have done it and then just stayed off of any kind of media for a year or so. I think he would have done it, man. I don't think money would have mattered to him. I don't think Vince saying, "I'll give you an extra 500,000 or an extra million or whatever, I think Trump would have done it just because that he wanted to help the WWE product. I think he would have, honestly.
I think a part of me thinks, agrees 100% with that, though. If you would have just asked him, maybe he would have done it. I don't know that Vince would have asked him. I think the match was just totally set up for Vince to shave his head and, that kind of thing. And for Austin to be involved in doing it and making it, fitting and things like that. But after he gets his head shaved, he kind of has sporadic appearances throughout the rest of, from 2005 on to now, because he's not as frequent as an on-screen character as he used to be. Of course, we mentioned earlier that he got blown up in a limo. Can't be on TV if I'm dead, pal. He had an illegitimate son named Hornswoggle. He was, as Jared shakes his head. Jared, you don't like Hornswoggle, do you?
That was the worst abomination of a program I've ever seen in my life.
Jason, what do you remember about Hornswoggle and that whole shenanigans?
At the time, I was a Fit Finley fan, so I was all about, when Hornswoggle would come out. But as far as the illegitimate son and, the mystery GM and everything, I thought that was the pits, if you will.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. Of course, you had Vince, part of the family feud with Randy Orton in 2009. We finally got it revealed on television that Triple H was part of the family, brother. Randy Orton attacked the whole family, and of course, who has to come down and save the day but Triple H getting a pedigree in the middle of the ring on Randy Orton, 1, 2, 3. All is right in the world. The day is saved. And Triple H is on top. Right, Jared? All is right in the world. Triple H. Pedigree. 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, as long as he pedigrees whoever right in the middle for the 1, 2, 3, everything's right in the world, honestly.
But one other appearance that I do want to talk about for Vince, a couple of them actually, but one in particular, is the feud that he had with Bret Hart in 2010. Bret Hart came back, and I think he was the guest. He was either the guest GM one Raw, or it was like Bret Hart Appreciation Night or something like that. Anyway, and obviously Bret and Vince had buried the hatchet before this because Bret got inducted to the Hall of Fame before this. But Bret and Shawn seemingly bury the hatchet on television, and then Vince comes out, and then he low blows Bret, and they have this rivalry, and they have a street fight at WrestleMania. And it was what it was. But, Jason, how awkward must this have been for Bret Hart? I mean, I know, like I said, they buried the hatchet, but it's got to be awkward, right? Wouldn't you think?
100%. I mean, I don't know how much creative control Bret had in this feud and, what he wanted and versus what Vince wanted. But, Vince obviously is going to have his say in, how things are going to be booked in this feud. But I would imagine, with the stroke and everything that Bret Hart had, years before, I don't know. Everything just didn't play out the way I think they both envisioned it. And I think it was one of the worst WrestleMania moments.
Oh, wow.
That match.
I don't think I would have gone as far as worst WrestleMania moments, but yeah, it wasn't great. Jared, what did you think about this whole Bret Hart situation and how it was awkward and things like that?
Man, just to be honest, I just felt like it was sad to see Bret get in there. And, he almost fell down doing the sharpshooter. I think it should have never happened. Maybe you could have had Bret back somebody who fought Vince McMahon or who fought Shawn Michaels or something.
Yeah.
But Bret shouldn't have been back in the ring, man. Even for his own safety, I don't think he'd be cleared today. And beyond that, it's sad to watch. Who wants to watch that?
He came out in his long jean shorts and his T-shirt and it looked
ridiculous. And it's not. I don't think it's his fault. It's just the stroke kind of left him a shell of a man, and I think that people just didn't want to see it. I didn't want to see it.
I mean, it could have just been, you're right. It could have, even if it wasn't like Brett backing somebody, they could have had a segment on WrestleMania where Brett comes out and he puts a sharpshooter on Vince and all's right in the world. You know, they could have at least just had a segment. It doesn't have to be a match, you know, kind of thing. And then they put the U.S. title on him after that, and it was kind of dumb. But one thing that I know that Jared wanted to make sure that we got into this show is one of the most memorable appearances from Vince McMahon in this era. And we're talking Royal Rumble 2005. Seemingly by accident, John Cena and Batista go over the top rope at the same time, and that created a little controversy. And then all of a sudden, the referees are trying to sort the whole thing out, blah, blah, blah. And then Vince's music hits. Jared, what happens next?
Well, we talked about we didn't want to see Brett because of the sad situation there. But, man, this sad situation absolutely tickled me to death. Here comes Vince. And he takes off his jacket and he throws it down and somewhat stomps on it. And here he goes off to the ring and, show him I set him straight. And then he tries to get in the ring and he tires both his quads, man. He can't even stand up. He tries, which is comical. And down he goes.
So he's talking to the referees and he's just sitting in the ring.
Yeah, I mean, what else can he do? Neither quad works.
Oh, my gosh. Jason,
I still love watching it back to this day. I highly recommend you look that up and just watch it.
Royal Rumble 2005. Go check that out. Jason, this has to be like number one on like most embarrassing Vince McMahon moments if you had to create a list. Is it not?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I would say it's number one for sure.
I mean, you could always, play the stand back video, or you could play, getting crap dumped on him or whatever, or peeing himself, Jared, like you mentioned earlier. But this, tearing both his quads, has to be number one on the list. I know. Oh, goodness. Okay. So, from one sad situation to another, we've talked about, and we mean sad by comical now, we've talked about Vince being a commentator. We've talked about Vince being a promoter, the evil boss. But what about Vince McMahon himself in the ring, bell to bell? I mean, just think about it for just a minute. He's been a world champion. He's been the ECW champion. He's won the Royal Rumble. He's had many main event matches at WrestleMania. He's beaten Taker. He's beaten Triple H, Ric Flair, Shawn Michaels. I mean, the list goes on and on. He's beaten Zach Gowen. I mean, come on. I mean, he's always said that he's never going to ask anybody to do what he wouldn't do, and he's in the ring. I think, this is just my opinion, again, we talked about how the boss, knows how to do it better than anybody. I'm not saying he's the best wrestler, and he never put on a 6-star match in the Tokyo Dome, brother. But he went out there and delivered every time, I thought. Jared, you're giving me the bright eyes. What do you think?
I mean, you really couldn't do the things you did with Vince without having him get in the ring. Ultimately, I mean, it just wouldn't have worked.
Right.
And I still remember at the St. Valentine's Day Massacre.
Oh my!
When he went flying off the black cage, which was the blue cage painted black at that point. And he hits like the small of his back.
Oh, it was a hard
right
one.
on the announcer's table, bounces up, and then hits it again, and finally breaks the daggone thing. But I mean, this this could have like crippled the man for life. I mean, it looked like it broke his back. I don't know how it didn't break his back.
I know. Yeah. I mean, I don't either. That is one of the roughest bumps that I've ever seen. And you're taking it, and you don't know when you're going to hit. You're falling back, back first off the cage, and you're hitting the small of your back, like you said, on the announce table. Man. So, yeah, this guy, he took bumps like nobody's business. He took the bump by HBK jumping off the 20-foot ladder at WrestleMania through the table, with the trash can over his head. Jason, what do you think as far as your memories of Vince being in the ring? If he delivered, I guess, what you would expect Vince to deliver.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, his physique was hilarious to me during that time when he was all, a bodybuilder and just, come out in that black tank top and pumping his guns left and right. It was just hilarious to watch. And to me, I don't know if he was trying to be funny, but yeah, say what you will about him and as a performer, but he would take bumps. And, going even to last year when Kevin Owens head bumped the guy and busted him open. I mean, Vince will put his body on the line, like you guys were saying, and he's got to be the leader of that company. So I think if he expects other wrestlers to do the same, he's got to do it himself.
Yep, I 100% agree, and that just makes me think of the video on I think it's the True Story of WrestleMania DVD, where it shows Vince doing the famous WrestleMania 12 entrance that Shawn Michaels did. It shows Vince doing it before Shawn, coming down from the top of the arena on that device or whatever it was. That's cool to me to see. Vince is always going to try it, but I bet if you ask Mick Foley, Vince didn't try to come off the side of the cell. I'm just saying. You never know.
Yeah. I still wonder to this day how much that was actually known was going to happen. I mean, we've heard that they knew he was going to come off the side of the cell. Why they didn't gimmick that table is far beyond me if they knew he was going to fly off there. And then supposedly he was supposed to get choke slammed on the top and choke slammed on the top and choke slammed on the top. And then he finally barely breaks through and he kind of hangs on and he drops down. So, I mean, I think Vince would have tried the breaking through and kind of slowly dropping down, which could have killed him if it went the way it did for Foley.
That's very true.
But I mean, I don't think Vince would have ever considered flying off the side of the cell. So.
No. Foley's just a man like nobody else. So we've talked a lot as we get ready to wrap up here. We're going to kind of wind down. We've talked about Vince McMahon in the wrestling business. All the visionary things that he's done, all the, the things that people were afraid to try. He did it. And that also extends to outside of the wrestling business. Bruce Pritchard always has said that Vince had the vision for the WWE network long before it came to be. And, they launched the network. You get all the big events, exclusive content, original shows, $9.99 a month. Jason, like you mentioned earlier, pay-per-views used to be $30 a month. Now we get it for $9.99 and it's all in one place. And that's all from Vince's brain. He also created the XFL. It failed for one season, failed after one season. Now it's making a comeback. He had the World Bodybuilding Federation and ICO Pro. That fell on its face. He acquired a hockey team in 1979. I think his greatest business move would have to be bringing WWE public in October of 1999, publicly trading the company, bringing the business to more success than ever before, more financial success than ever before. Of course, there's no competition, so that does help. But still, Jason, we'll start with you. What do you think what will Vince's business legacy, what will it be remembered for? For the network or like the XFL, positive or negative? What do you think?
I mean, I would have to say I would second what you said, Chris, with being a publicly traded company. How many people out there are starting their own business would kill to have that type of success with their company. They're still the only wrestling company that has ever done it. So I don't see anybody else kind of even coming close at this point as far as being able to have that wide success that WWE has.
They're a global phenomenon, a global juggernaut, as I've called them. That's for sure. Jared, what do you think? As far as his business legacy, what will Vince be remembered for?
I think taking chances. Just like what you all had said, I think as far as okay, it's really hard because you can't go back and see what would have happened.
Sure.
But making it publicly traded probably made him richer than what he would have been before now. I mean, it might would have taken longer. But at the same time, everything that you hear every wrestling fan bitch about is a lot to do with it being a publicly traded company. He can't just say, go out there and do whatever you want. If they say something wrong, if they do something wrong, if they offend a minority, if they offend anybody, and it's very easy to offend people today, which is one thing that makes me sick about the world. All political, things aside, it really amazes me how easily people get offended by anything. Like, you can't even have a conversation without offending somebody. But all that to say, if he hadn't went public, he could still be doing whatever that he wanted to do whenever he wanted to do it. Would he have had as much money? I don't know. I think he would be selling. I think the product would be better. I think he would sell more action figures, more merchandise. But at the same time, man, I mean, he's selling off shares whenever he feels like it and making 300 and some million in one day.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't think the WWE product is nearly as good as what it could be or would be if he hadn't ever went publicly traded. But, I mean, it's hard to argue as far as if money is your main concern, and it seems to be Vince's. I mean, that's probably the best business move he's ever made.
I 100% agree. And I definitely think that's what he'll be remembered for. Of course, the XFL, that's, we'll see what happens in 2020 if that turns out to be any sort of success at all. But I think it really helped. I didn't mention this. When Vince acquired the hockey team in '79, they also acquired an arena along with the team. And that really taught them how to run arenas early on, and I think that's really attributed to their success, especially getting a grasp on the arena market so early. And that was even before WrestleMania. Jason, that's got to help as far as, WWE runs. At that time they were running Madison Square Garden only. Well, now they're running 5 arenas a week or so. So you have to think that was an advantage, getting an early jump in '79 on the arena business and things like that.
Absolutely. I agree.
So, as we kind of wrap up, we get ready to put a bow on this week's episode. There's not much more that you can add when you think about Vince McMahon. The old saying that you choose a job you love and you'll never work a day in your life, that's Vince, man. Jared, when you think of Vince, we've talked about everything that he's done, being a father, a businessman, promoter, the character, the wrestler. We said what his business legacy is going to be in the wrestling business itself. Now let's take away, going public and things like that. What is his greatest accomplishment within the wrestling business? What do you think?
I would say just on a whole, the whole feud with Steve Austin. I mean, I don't think it can be argued that it was bigger, in my opinion, than the NWO, which is widely regarded as maybe one of the best wrestling creations of all time. And based on what ratings, based on who won that war, how can you argue that Stone Cold and Vince McMahon as a feud was not bigger than the NWO?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he kind of took that and took it to a whole other level, and definitely set the wrestling business on fire. The Austin feud, you would say, Jared, that's probably your favorite Vince McMahon memory, or is there something else that kind of jumps out to you?
I mean, that and creating WrestleMania. I can't think of anything bigger that the man's really done in my eyes.
Sure.
But, I mean, I'd love to hear it if you all can think of something, but that's just what comes to my mind.
Jason, what comes to your mind is there anything else as far as a wrestling accomplishment, and what your favorite Vince memory is from all of your time watching wrestling and hearing him on commentary and, watching him as a character?
I think as far as the character goes, my favorite memory will always be when he fires somebody. I think he got that over so well, and all the fans love it no matter what happens. So I think that will always be kind of his MO, so to speak. But behind the scenes, I think just his ability to reinvent the wheel, so to speak, whether it's your Hulk Hogan, like we mentioned earlier, or Stone Cold, and The Rock, and Cena and Roman Reigns. I know that's controversial, but just finding that guy and pushing his product, Vince has nailed it every single time. I know that the truth isn't out on, so to speak, with Roman Reigns, but it's close.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we can sit here and debate it all we want about how Vince is getting old, Vince is out of touch, Vince is this, Vince is that. I mean, Jared, like you said, making millions of dollars a day. I mean, the guy knows what he's doing. And
I mean, I guess I would like to pose the question to the both of you, and if it's just age related, this really isn't going to be that good of a question because it's obvious to everybody. But just like Jason was saying with Roman Reigns, and I mean, I don't think it was a success. I think John Cena was to some point, but you look back, and even like during the Attitude Era, during like the cartoon WWF, what was it called, like Rockin' Wrestling or whatever the crap.
Yep.
All that stuff. You've always had these larger than life personalities, usually multiple personalities at once.
Mm-hmm.
And so, without answering my own question here, I'm going to pose it as part of the question. Why do you think Vince sucks nowadays when it comes to getting multiple people over and getting that one person over? Does he just not listen to the fans? Is he so stubborn and he's had so many home runs that he just thinks no matter what he does, it's going to work and he's not going to change his mind? Or is he just out of touch? Has he finally gotten too old to really know what the public wants? And it's just about money and he doesn't care. I mean, what's the answer?
Jason, I'll let you go first.
I guess from our viewpoint as the quote unquote smart fans, we'll never see eye to eye with Vince McMahon with this stage of his life and who he wants to be over. I've been on record to say I'm not the biggest Roman Reigns fan, but for what they are trying to do with the product as far as the PG, to grab those kids' attentions and make that superhero that we mentioned earlier, I think that it's a success, and that's kind of the way he's modeling the company at this point in time. So, for Roman to be the top draw merchandise holder outside of Cena, when Cena's not on the bill, I think that it kind of proves Vince's point. But as far as kind of going with the people that grew up with Vince in the Attitude Era and everything, I think there's always going to be a big disconnect, kind of what you're mentioning, Jared, and how we kind of can see through Roman Reigns and see how he's pushed as the guy when, someone like a Finn Balor or, I don't know, whoever else comes about that we want to see pushed. I kind of think that Vince may may not care what the crowd thinks. I don't know if it's because he's old or whatnot, but I think it's just his stubbornness.
I'll piggyback on what both of you guys are saying and kind of add to it. I don't know if this is true. I would like to think that it's true, but I kind of think that Triple H thought this way when he created NXT. I think NXT was created for the smart fans like us and the upper part of the demographic that they're trying to reach. So if they're trying to reach, let's say they're trying to reach 10 to 25-year-olds, and, we're the upper 26 to 35-year-olds, I think Triple H may have seen that and said, okay, well, let's create a product that is not necessarily Attitude Era, but is more focused on wrestling. The characters are more real, and thus we have NXT. You bring in the indie darlings that all these smart fans love, and you put them under the WWE umbrella. So I think Triple H may have thought of a nice marriage between those two things and created NXT for guys like us. Now, again, I'm not the biggest Roman Reigns fans either, but we see Vince pushing him, and Vince has always been stubborn about who he's going to push, and that's that. There are some exceptions. Daniel Bryan, CM Punk, AJ Styles, you can argue that the fans really brought them to another level, and then Vince and creative had no choice but to accept it. So I think Vince is tuned in with what the fans want, but I think, Jared, you made the point that, he's stubborn, and he likes who he likes, and you're going to like who he likes, and he's the only company out there, and that's that. But like I said, I'm hoping that maybe Triple H saw that, and that's why he helped create an alternative under the WWE umbrella.
Yeah. I like and agree with both y'all's points, and I honestly don't have an answer, or else I wouldn't have asked the question. I don't know what it is. I wish that if it was Triple H's response to the smart fans, that we could get at least a 2-hour product every week. Maybe get it more over on the two big brands, Raw and SmackDown. Maybe see just some more advertisements, some more promotion for it. And that terrible day that is going to come, and we may all three be gone before it comes. And the way Vince goes,
he's gonna live forever, pal.
When he does pass away, I will be interested to see what Triple H does, and I guess Stephanie, and maybe even Shane. Now it seems like he's kind of weaseled his way back into the fold. It'll be interesting to see what they do with it, if it kind of does become more NXT-like. I hope it does. I think that we just need a change, and I hate for it to be that the CEO is going to have to pass on or be decapitated, or not decapitated, hopefully not, but be like, what do you even call it? Like
incarcerated.
Well, just to the point that he can't run things.
No.
Well, I think he's like, but demobilized or whatever the case may be, where he can't keep running things and he can't keep going the way that he's been going. I hate for that to be the reason why we get a new product, a new lease on the WWE life. But I do want to see big changes somehow, and I think that's the only thing that's going to kind of propel us into a different era than the one that we've been in for the past 10, 12 years.
I think, just to add to what you said, I think we could see more NXT advertisement and promotion and maybe even involvement whenever SmackDown goes to Fox later next year. I think you could see something, not necessarily putting NXT on Fox, but I definitely can see something, I don't know, because they'll have a bigger national spotlight, they'll want to push NXT more, I feel like. Jason, anything else you want to add on that NXT front and kind of cap off what Jared was saying?
I think that's the hope. I think that when Papa H comes into play and runs the thing, I think that the main product will kind of symbolize what NXT is now, and I think that's kind of the direction that they're going once that happens. So I'm excited.
I would hope so. That's for sure. Well, boys, that kind of puts a bow on this week's episode. We've talked a long time about the creator of WrestleMania, the man that brings WWE to our television sets every week, the brainchild behind the whole thing, the visionary, Vincent Kennedy McMahon. It is definitely safe to say there will be none like Vince ever in the future of the wrestling business. If you missed the top of the show, you can find us on social media. We are at Music City Mania on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find Jared at JaredWillis01 on Twitter, at JWJust01 on Instagram. Jason is at JasonThomas824 on Twitter, at Jason Backwoods on Instagram. I am at Belcher Drums on both. Again, the show is at Music City Mania. You can shoot us an email, musiccitymaniapodcast@gmail.com. You can find our show, again, on iTunes, on SoundCloud, on Google Play, and some exclusive content and our shows on YouTube. So check that out. Search Music City Mania there. Jared, we'll start with you. Anything else you want to add before we sign off on this week's episode?
I at some point am going to try to make some sort of Snapchat account, or I may just even put out my own Snapchat account if I can't figure out how to make one for this show. That will just make it a lot easier whenever that we go to these rock concerts and Bruce Pritchard and whoever else and whatever else and WrestleMania and NXTs and all that. And so I'm going to work on that and try to maybe get that up and going in the next couple weeks, and then I'll put that Snapchat out or my own personal Snapchat out. If you have any interest in that, you can message us, or if not, I'll just put it out there at some point and see what kind of hits we get. But other than that, man, I'm just going to go ahead. I'll go ahead and give the old head wave, and I guess we'll call it a night. The living legend, Larry Sabisco, is out.
The living legend is signing off. Jason, anything else you want to add before we sign off, my friend?
Go support your local wrestling companies.
Go support your local wrestling companies. That is a great idea. Check them out. They're always good. I mean, they're not the WWE, obviously, but those guys have the dream to get there. So check those guys out. Once again, Jason Backwoods, Jared Justice, I am Chris Belcher. We are the Triple Threat here on the Music City Mania podcast. Thanks for joining us this week for our 52nd episode, 1 year's worth of podcasting. All of the archives are available everywhere that our show is available, so go check all of those out if you are just now joining us. Again, this has been the Music City Mania podcast, and as the Rattlesnake would say, we'll catch you guys down the road.